at the front end of my career, I would tell classes of mental health professionals, no one is ever going to walk into your office and fill out an intake form on their presenting problem that says shame. That has changed a hundred percent.
Interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
Today, you might have somebody who walks in your office and they say, I have shame issues. But I believe that sin and shame are literally part of the human condition that happened literally in the fall in Genesis. It's as old a story as
Yeah.
humankind is, and yet we might argue with everything we do online, etc. We might argue that there's more talk about it today, but there's also more problem with it today
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
Dr. Shaw, thank you for being with us today. To start our conversation, would you tell us about your definition of shame, how you define that, and then tell us the story of how you arrived at that definition?
happy to do it. Thanks for having me. So, when I think about shame and grace material, you start with like, what is embarrassment and what is guilt and what is shame? Because those three terms get used a lot and they overlap and they mean some similar things, and yet there are some distinctions between them. So I think embarrassment is the easy one. I mean, most of us relate to something where we blush or something, makes us feel silly, or we tell a story and usually we laugh and we feel good about it and we share it, and we have a good chuckle and we all move on. It doesn't really impact us. I joke all the time in class that nobody goes to therapy because they got embarrassed. It's just part of life. We all say and do funny and silly and stupid things.
Right.
The next layer and level up is guilt. And when I think about guilt, that's about my behaviors, right? We feel guilty when we do or say or think or feel something that, like, morally we feel like that's not right. There's something wrong with that. And I need to apologize. I need to make it right. There's an accountability piece to that. And so I think of guilt as good. Guilt is correcting. Guilt is behavior. Guilt is there are consequences to my actions, and sometimes I have to do things to make that right, or to repair a relationship. So that's guilt. Shame for me is a whole different thing. Shame is a place of like my identity. Shame is about my character. And when a person wrestles with or thinks or feels about shame, it's like I'm never enough. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. It's like low self esteem on steroids, right? And so it impacts me, it impacts all my key relationships, and it feels like it's a flaw at my characteristic or identity place. Never good enough. No matter what my grades are, they're never good enough. No matter my performance at work, it's never quite enough. No matter how much money I make, what my title is, how big my office is, whatever it is, shame says, well, if you were really good, it'd be a bigger office, it'd be more money, it'd be a better grade, you would have done this earlier in life, whatever it is, it's always a way of cutting your legs out from underneath of you. And so then I operate out of a place of identity and a characteristic that I'm never enough. And then, at least for some of us, we take that into our spiritual lives and we think that that's how God thinks about us or how God treats us, which isn't the case, but we kind of project it into our spiritual world. And so that shame piece, it's so devastating, it's so cutting, and it just stops us from all the kinds of things that I think God wants to do in and through us, because it's so limiting. It's just so hideous. So that's kind of
Yeah.
what I think of as
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. So in your work with people, I mean, is there a common source of where shame comes from? Is there, and there's probably different reasons, but behind the psychology of shame, what do you find? Where's the place that it really comes from?
So it's probably a little bit stereotypical, but you have to start with what we call the family of origin, right? And I'm not here to throw shade at our families, but it's the place where we all learned and we all grew, and where we received the training and the feedback and the understanding. And so in our family, generally, there's no such thing as a perfect family. Some of us got more shame, some less, the rest of us in the middle. But we start with the family we grew up in. No such thing as a perfect family. There are going to be moments and experiences where shame happens in those most key and close relationships. But it can come from anywhere. I mean, I hear all the time, and again, not picking on anybody, but sports and coaches, teachers, right? And neighbors. I mean, anybody, anywhere where there's just the sense that we're just not quite enough and that we take that in. And certain personalities and certain people take that more to heart than others. But it can just be like, just damaging of like, I'm never good enough. And we're not even talking yet about abuse or trauma
Right.
Sure.
and stuff that's like, hideous
Really
stuff
deep
that
stuff.
really is deep shame. I think sometimes when people think about shame, that's what they think about. They think of abuse and trauma. And my whole life and career has been making sense of shame is not just for those experiences. We all have some degree of not cutting it, not having worth, not being enough. But it literally comes in relationship, and it comes from experiences that either we have done or that have been done to us.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Along those lines of, the everyday experience, it also seems that in some ways there's more attention on shame now, that there's more openness to talking about mental illness,
Yep.
mental health, more of a focus on that. What are some of the ways that you see uh, that conversation missing something about shame that that we ought to look deeper at?
So I'm a mental health professional and I've been in the field for over 30 years and I've been teaching and training on these kind of topics that whole time. And at the front end of my career, I would tell classes of mental health professionals, no one is ever going to walk into your office and fill out an intake form on their presenting problem that says shame. That has changed 100%.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow.
Today, you might have somebody who walks in your office and they say, I have shame issues. So it has changed that much in 25 plus years in the field. And Brene Brown has played a huge role in that. She put shame on the front burner. She put it on the table in a way over about the last 15 years or so that it just wasn't before. Brene Brown has done a lot to help us with mental health and the idea of shame. Again, it's not really a critique, but my only critique is I just tell people, trust me, people were thinking and talking and writing about shame before Brene Brown was, just for the record. But with the stuff that you can Google on her and her writing and her research, something about the way she put that forward, the timing, etc. It just blew up in the last 15 years or so. But I mean, I went to grad school 30 years ago and I was reading authors that were talking about shame and grace stuff from the 50s and 60s and 70s and literally 50 years ago. But there is a new voice, it feels like, that's put that out with mental health in a way that makes it more palatable, more okay. I think the stigma, I know we can drive 20 minutes and run into stigma for mental health. I know that. But in general, the stigma about mental health also, I believe, has shifted dramatically. And it's allowed conversations to happen on a different level, more intimately, more authentically. And shame has been a big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been involved in kind of the ministry world for a while. You went to Oku for a while, Asbury, Fuller. I mean, you're kind of steep. So without getting into too much detail, talk about some of the theology of shame, right? Talk about, I mean, the scriptures speak to this kind of, because I'm guessing most of us feel a level of shame on some level, right? And so it's kind of part of the human nature, the fallen nature. So just talk a little bit about a better understanding of shame from a biblical perspective.
So I usually start and say, every one of us relates to some level of shame out of our background and story. Some of us a little, some of us a lot, the rest of us somewhere in the middle based on a lot of circumstances. But I believe that sin and shame are literally part of the human condition that happened literally in the fall in Genesis, where you see in the scripture how a man and woman were together. They were naked. They felt no shame, literally what Genesis says.
Hmm.
And they operated and they were in relationship and they were vulnerable at the most, serious levels, right? Of everything that is there. And they felt no shame, right? And even walking with God, they were in right relationship with the God of the universe and felt no shame, right? And then we have the fall. And I believe directly that sin, we hear sin, but sin and shame are the
Hmm.
exact results of the fall of mankind. And at that point, awareness
Mm.
came that wasn't there before, but it's not a good awareness, right?
Right.
We talked today about being aware.
Yeah.
It was a different awareness, but they became aware of things in a way that was different than had ever been before. And they felt their shame. They noticed their shame. It drove them to hide. It drove them to isolation, to separation from each other, and ultimately from God. So, literally, part of the human condition from the fall. And then, to do a little more biblically, we have so many pieces throughout Old Testament and New where we talk about the redemption
Hmm.
of that shame,
Yeah.
where we talk about the healing of that. Literally, the fact that Christ gave his life to cover our sin and shame and to allow us to see ourselves differently and to relate with other people in authentic and real ways by not hiding, by not isolating, by being a real person in real relationship, which means we're flawed and we're broken and we're in process.
Mm. Yeah.
But I mean, those are scary things to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
They're hard. They're
Yeah.
not easy.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that the aspect of the redemption story, and that it's part of the whole plan of salvation and the reason for um, Jesus' role in
Yep.
that. One of our professors, Josh McNall, uh, speaks about atonement, and one of the theories of atonement being about dealing with shame.
Yep.
I find myself thinking that that's kind of an almost an under, not necessarily underrated, but under talked about aspect of the gospel story. Um, I'm just, and one of the things that he said is something like along the lines of, it deals with the shame for the wrong that I've done and the wrong others have done to me.
Yes.
Um, what is it about that we kind of sometimes miss in the story?
Well, I'm not sure why we miss that because it feels like it's front and center, right? It
Yeah.
feels like it's the story. I don't know if we get caught up on the sin piece. I don't know if we get caught up on the selfish or the me piece of that. I don't know what it is, but the sin and shame that we feel. Shame is a relational concept. It's personal, but it shows up in key relationships. It's systemic in
Hmm.
nature,
Hmm.
whether that's a husband and wife, or parenting with kids, or a boss and a somebody who's working for them, or vice versa, a teacher and a student. I mean, it's in a relational context where we have opportunity to connect, to attach, to be known, to be real, to be authentic, that we don't, that we're scared.
Yeah.
It's fear
Yeah.
based. It's scared. And so the shame piece, just of course I'm a little biased, makes perfect sense as
Hmm.
a part of the redemptive forgiveness atonement process that Christ paid the ultimate price for us to be able to be in right relationship with one another and with the God of the universe. That was the whole plan, right?
Yeah.
How
Yep.
to overcome those shame of hiddenness and isolation and division and separation. It's as old a story as
Yeah.
humankind is, and yet we might argue, after a pandemic, with everything we do online, etc., we might argue that there's more talk about it today, but there's also more problem with it today
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. Let me piggyback on that just for a minute because one of the conversations a few of us have read or reading Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation,
Yep.
on mental health issues with
Yep.
adolescents directly tied to social media. We've seen this just skyrocketing of anxiety and depression. And there's been this cultural shift where for a lot of people, their life is lived online. I mean, it's lived out in front of people. And you may say something that you regret, but if it's out there,
It's
everybody know
there.
everybody, and it lives forever, right? So can you just that relationship between social media, anxiety, depression, shame, what is that like? What is that conversation like? How do you connect those dots between those three things.
So uh, it is an interesting thing to think about how that is just a standard part of our life and relationship today, especially the younger you are, the more it's a given. It's
Hmm.
just like that is a part of living life and living relationship. And yet there's this weird, in my opinion, hiddenness, this weird distance. Like there's something different when I'm sitting in front of my computer or I'm on my iPad. It's almost like it's not real.
Hmm.
And yet I'm dealing with real people, real feelings, real statements that are out there forever that, I can't retract. And yet, I mean, spend any time on X? Oh my
It
good,
shouldn't.
it's
Yeah,
horrible.
it's awful.
Yeah.
And so, how do we explain? I don't
Yeah,
know how to explain it except that it's dehumanizing.
yeah,
It's almost like we don't
Yeah.
think of real people
yeah. It
being
brings out the
involved.
worst of
It
us instead of the best
totally
of us. Yeah.
does. Critical, judgmental. I mean, like, yeah, the worst of the human condition
Hmm.
often shows up in that place. And again, for me, I'm just like, it just feels dehumanizing that maybe we just have dehumanized the person on the other end of whatever that post is.
Yeah.
And we don't treat them like a real person. We
Hmm.
certainly don't treat them like somebody made in the image of God.
Yeah.
We hardly treat them as human.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good check for, those of us who follow Jesus and want to have every aspect of our lives reflect that. It's a check for me to think like, am I in this case wanting to pile on the shame here? Like, is my online behavior shaming somebody else? And in some cases, it's easy to kind of jump on the bandwagon online, and in other ways that you may
Totally.
not in person.
It's um it's almost a mob
Yeah, yeah, that's
mentality.
exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost a negative
Hmm.
group experience. So you get a mob, a group together, and all of a sudden there's something about the individual piece that just kind of like evaporates. It's
Yeah.
like gone, and all of a sudden we pile on, and we just follow the mob. We follow what others are doing, and we pile on, and again, it's just dehumanizing. And then I don't think we always do a good job of taking personal responsibility in that context of
Mm.
what we did or didn't do or said or didn't say. And somehow we like make excuses for it or it's okay there. When a first check is if I was looking you face to face at a table like this, would I ever say
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
saying on social media? And
Mm-mm.
now some people would, but most of us are like, I would
Of course not.
never say
Right.
that to you. So then also we have to ask some questions about what is that tapping into inside of us that is apparently there. It's just that it doesn't always show up around a table, but it shows up in some kind of weird safety
Mm.
online when we've dehumanized somebody.
Right.
Oh, I mean, it just, I don't know, it stirs
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
place in me.
Yeah.
It's beyond sad. I
Yeah.
mean, hurtful,
Really.
sad,
Yeah.
judgmental, critical, the
Hmm.
worst
Dehumanizing.
sides.
Yeah.
It is the
Hmm.
worst sides of
Yeah.
relational stuff.
Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, what we're describing here is on the one hand, there's a lot more awareness of mental health
Right?
and this kind of lowering of stigma.
Right?
And at the same time, a tendency for people to jump on the bandwagon and really in ugly ways shame people in probably ways that are less repairable than in previous generations. So I
Yeah, what do we do
bringing
with
it,
that?
what do we do with that?
I
I think it's
know.
kind of a bringing it back to earlier what we were talking about was
Yeah.
the idea of the gospel story actually gives us a picture of some sort of solution to this.
Yeah.
Where do you see grace and the idea of grace fitting into this?
Lovely question. So, in the work that I've done with shame and grace, I routinely say that shame is a construct of dysfunction and brokenness. And grace is a construct of healing and forgiveness and breakthrough and connection. So when we think about grace, which I know for some people is a little too churchy of word or a biblical word, some of us are really comfortable with that. Some of us might not be. But again, if we think of it as a construct of connection, a construct of attachment, a construct of repair of relationship, it becomes a way that we think and a way that we connect with other people. It becomes a way we treat one another and how we treat ourselves because of what God has done in our behalf. And so, how to live out being a person of grace. like a mission or a vision statement, like literally a number of years ago, I'm sitting in my office thinking about these kind of concepts and this kind of stuff and trying to get my own arms around it. And sitting there, it just came to me that my personal mission is to attempt to be a person of grace in a world of shame. Now, some days I'm better than that than others, but every day I keep that in front of me when I'm in the classroom, when I'm in traffic, when I'm having an issue with my spouse, when I'm parenting, when I'm at work. Moments are going to happen. How do I attempt to be a person of grace in a world where there's no lack of shame? That's what I try to do every day. And my goodness, I mean, talk about a calling from the gospel. I mean, it doesn't get much better than
Yeah.
that, right? If we all tried to be a person of grace in a world of shame, then the stuff we were just talking about on social media would not be that way.
Yeah.
And a lot of other things wouldn't be that way either.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm curious for you, Dr. Shaw, because most everybody deals with shame on some level. We've
Yep.
kind of talked about that. So for those of us, I find that there's usually this negative voice in the back of our head, right? That you should be more like,
Yep.
or you could never, whatever that may
Yep.
be. So, but I also find that maybe that works its way into relationships with others, that we start to assume the worst in others, or we start to kind of view them from almost a shame perspective. So the question is, how does grace change the voice in our head? And how does it change the way that we see others, right? So it's hard to gift somebody something if we haven't experienced it yet, right? In repair and
100%.
things like that. So can you speak to that just a little bit, that in our own head and then in our relationship with others? What differences does grace make?
As a mental health professional who loves Jesus, I work from a model that's called restoration therapy. And the quick on that is the way I try to answer the question you're talking about. Restoration therapy says that love and trustworthiness are the two twin pillars of healthy life and healthy relationship. Love and trustworthiness. In the model, love is about identity. Who am I? Who am I as a man? Who am I as a woman? Who am I as a dad, as a husband, as a follower of Jesus? So I have to lean into who I am and understand my identity in Christ that helps me choose different behaviors to be a healthy person in relationship. So I got to have some awareness, and I got to look in the mirror, and I got to ask some hard questions. And then I have to say, where do I need to make some changes, and how do I practice those changes? The second half of that is trustworthiness. And trustworthiness is emotional safety and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So just for a minute, think about the people or the places where you can be the most emotionally safe, or you can be the most vulnerable and be cared for and loved and accepted. We need more places that feel like that, more
Mm-hmm.
people that feel like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need our churches to look like that. We need small groups to feel like that. We need recovery places to do that. We need places where we can be who God made us to be, our identity, in relationship and in places where we can be authentic and real and in process of learning the new behaviors. So it's about repair
Mm-hmm.
in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm aware of that, if I'm in a process of that, and you or I are in relationship and I do something bonehead, or you tell me I did something that was a bonehead or was shaming, etc., then how in relationship are we able to say, you're right, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I, I should have never said that, or that didn't come out the way I wanted it to. That was coming from me and my brokenness, and I projected that on you. Will you forgive me? I'm sorry. I'm going to do better. If we have places
Mm-hmm.
that we can practice
Mm-hmm.
that kind of repair, um, I mean, we'll change the world.
Yeah.
We'll change the church. We'll
Yeah.
change community. We'll change people and places, because who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
We're
Absolutely.
all,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
built for community and built to be in relationship.
Mhm.
Who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
It's attracting and it's healthy. So we gotta sort those things out.
Yeah.
Is that
You
making
It does
sense?
make sense. And you mentioned more than once in our conversation, you use the word process,
Yep.
right? And I think sometimes when we think about psychological health or transformation, that there's an assumption of I'm going to get it together in a moment, right? We used the analogy earlier today with some students of I'm going to lose 10 pounds in 3 days. So when we talk about grace, we talk about transformation.
Yep.
How important is it to embrace this as a process, not something that's instantaneous, right? And how does that change both our attitudes towards ourselves and maybe the people in our world or around us that as we try to repair and enter into safe relationships? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I would say as strongly as I can, and I'll just turn that on its ear, without that, we're not going to
Yeah.
change. I mean, it's like it is vital, it is fundamental to change. I often in my classes, with a smile on my face, say, we know how transformation happens. Everybody wants transformation. Everybody wants change, right? I'm in the change business, right? Whether we're in ministry or we're in counseling, we're in the change business. We know how change happens. It's just not the way we actually want it to happen, because change happens a little bit at a time, over and over and over and over a long period of time. It's a process. And usually transformation happens by taking 2 or 3 steps forward and 1 step back. 2 or 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Right? At the end of the day, we're still hoping we get a
Yeah,
+1 between the
exactly.
steps forward and
Yeah.
the one back, but that's not even always the case,
Mhm.
depending on the day or week or
Mhm.
circumstance. But over time, in a process, when we're committed to that, we can see exactly what we're headed, which is we're moving forward, we're making changes, we're becoming more like Christ, and it's showing up in our
Mhm.
key
Yeah.
relationships. But it's not a weekend
Takes
gig.
time.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
it takes time. And I love the church. I hope it's okay to say this. I love the church, but some aspects of the church historically have not given much
Yeah.
room for process or for time.
Mhm.
We want it instantaneously,
Mhm.
and our culture certainly wants everything instantaneous, but
Mhm.
sometimes in the church we do too. And it does happen.
Yeah.
I believe Jesus
Yeah.
does miracles today, and that can still happen. But my experience, more than not, is it's a
Yeah.
process, it takes time, and it's a journey.
Yeah. I work with students quite a bit who kind of entered in a psychological, we talk about all or nothing thinking sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And so students live with this idea of either I'm gonna get it right, and if there's one mistake, they're off the
Done.
wagon,
Yeah.
right? And so we talk a lot about that your trajectory matters more than your perfection,
Love it.
right? That where you're going in general matters with, because it's 2 steps forward, it's 1 step back, and so thank you for just
Yeah.
digging into that a little bit.
Yeah. What advice would you give to somebody who is like listening to this and saying, "Yes, I want to start this process." Where would you advise them to start? Either in dealing with like maybe an internal shame that they don't know how to get out of, or trying to create that place of dealing with shame with someone else.
A couple thoughts come to mind. First is I would ask that person to identify the safest place or safest person in their world. I mean, is there anybody that's there or that has the potential that I could start with in thinking through, talking through, trying to make sense of in a safe way? Can I have an authentic conversation with somebody in my world that I know is not going to shame me when I put my guard down and I'm authentic with being in process? So, number one, where's a safe place? Where's a safe person that I can even start having this conversation? I certainly have some biases as a mental health professional. Sometimes that's a professional, and sometimes it's a pastor, sometimes it's a best friend, but sometimes it's someone who's like, okay, I'm actually trained to provide a space, hopefully where it's safe, where I can be authentic and I can be real. So that's the first thing, is a place and or a person that allows you to even start those conversations, maybe even before you repair or go to a person that
Sure.
you need to do that
Yeah.
work with. Secondly, please smile with me. Shameless plug. There's this book called Shame No More that I wrote a few years ago. If you Google anything on shame and grace, and you get to Brene Brown, you get to Lewis, there's so many people have written and have done other podcasts and have done TED Talks. And I mean, like, literally just go do what we all do, which is, well, let's just go Google shame, Google grace, Google shame and grace, vulnerability, the kind of terms we're using today. And of course, not everything you find on the other end of that's going to be good and helpful, but I bet you'll find some stuff where somebody else has said, yeah, me too. Same story,
Yeah.
right? I can relate. It's not an isolated thing. So get some training, or get to some materials, or get to an author, or get to a person or place where you're like, let's add some input that's based on some research, that's based on the word, that's based on some history that seems solid. Let's input some stuff that helps us start thinking about, what am I doing? How do I need to change this? What's this look like? How do I even go about doing this? Sometimes people have a moment around something like what we're talking about, and all of a sudden they go approach people that they've had, that they need to do repair with, and so they just go straight to this person. They
Yeah.
try to have a conversation. They try to, and it blows up.
Yeah, not
It doesn't
really.
work,
Yeah.
and all this, and it's worse, or at least as bad as it was before, because they're like, I mean, it's a knee jerk, right?
Right.
Let's just fix that relationship, and it just turns into a mess. And you're like, oh, great intention, but let's just work on a little bit about how to maybe go about some
Yeah.
of that.
Mhm.
And again, we talked earlier, I'm just going to go apologize and make everything right in one conversation.
Right,
And,
right, right.
it's like, well, maybe,
Mhm.
but if it had some depth or meaning or history to it, maybe it's a series of conversations. Maybe it's some hard conversations before we even get close to the good stuff that we're all wanting. And maybe it's coming out of my, like, oh, I just want to get this off my chest and I want to feel better. And if I could just go to you and do this, then I won't have to feel it anymore. And then that doesn't work. And then we're like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So those are starter places that
Sure.
I'm like,
Yeah.
find people, find places, find some materials that allow you to start saying, what is this thing? What's going on? How do I start to attend to it in order to try and to do some health
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, that's good.
One of the things that I'm hearing in this conversation, it's just striking me so much the importance of relationship.
Mm.
That it has to happen in a context, and it's not that one-off conversation. It's the possibility of extending that out, and really what you want is the relationship,
Right.
and that connection I think is so important for us. And we talk a lot about levels of loneliness that people are feeling, and some people have trouble even starting relationships and keeping connections and relationships.
And interesting, yeah, absolutely. And then I'm thinking back to our, our Zoom world, our social media world.
Yeah.
I'm a mental health professional. I have a practice out in Vancouver, Washington. I see clients one day a week along with my teaching schedule. And about 60% of my clients are on Zoom. And so relationship, of course, happens like we're doing it right here, face to face around a table together. But it also can be that the thing we're talking about that gets in the way, X and social media and all that, it can actually be a tool that builds relationships. 60% of my clients never come into my office in Vancouver, Washington. They're on Zoom, and we're doing relationship repair work on the very computers that you guys have in front of you right now. So again, right? Two-sided coin,
Sure.
right? The
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
thing that can lead to
Sure.
breakthrough and connection and relationship is also the very thing
Yeah.
where we shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Yeah, had a comment. Technology is neutral, right? But it can bring out the best of us or the worst of us. But it's just a projection of
It's just a
what's
tool,
underneath.
right?
Yeah.
It's just a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that means the barrier is low. I
Yeah.
mean, you
Right?
can use it to start that
Exactly,
first step in the
absolutely.
process, really, of dealing with that shame. That's so helpful. I want to talk about an area that's a little bit different than what we've been
Okay.
talking about, but I think it's kind of maybe something that might be relevant to our listeners, and certainly people who are in the professional sphere. That shame might be actually part of that voice in our head that drives us forward to perform, to do better. Is saying, I'm not good enough, and I might, there, it might be that internal motivator and driver,
Yep.
which leads to things like imposter syndrome, which
Yep.
we've heard. Can you help us understand a little bit better in that sphere?
So it is interesting. I often think of parenting, but then I'll try to relate here as well. That I'll routinely say shame works. It propels us forward. It pushes us. Shame works in parentheses, but the consequences that come with shame don't work at all.
Mm.
Right? You shame kids, you get them to behave, you'll get them to do the thing you want them to do, but the
Yeah, the
consequences that
cost.
come with that, the cost is much greater than the thing that you wanted to get them to do. It's the same idea in the context you're putting out there. So shame drives us, fear drives us. And again, I'll be really respectful and careful, but just take a minute and think about our world these days. Shame and fear drive
Mm.
lots of things. However, the consequences, the outcome of that often is right. The outcome is worse than the
Yeah.
what's that old statement, right? The consequences are worse than the thing
Yeah,
was in the
right.
first
Yeah,
place.
yeah, exactly.
And so it works, but it doesn't work at all. And so it just creates a cycle of driving and driving and pushing and pushing. It creates isolation. It creates cutoff. It creates cycles of exhaustion. There's an old book called Tired of Trying to Measure Up by Jeff Van Vonderen. And that was an early book that I read in the field. And it's just exhausting. It's not sustainable. Shame is not sustainable. Being driven by those factors, it doesn't ever get you there. It never really pays off. And then there are consequences that come with it. And then you're burnt out and isolated and anxious and depressed at the end of the day. And yet, we all still do it, or we have conversations and contexts where whatever it is still being driven by that. So somewhere in there, I mean, I don't know. It takes a
Yeah.
moment. It takes a person saying, time out.
Yeah.
This cycle is not getting me or us where we really want to get to.
Yeah.
And are we willing to risk like doing something else or trying something else with the hopes that we get to a different end result? But that's scary because we do
Sure.
what we know
Yeah.
and our brains do what
Yeah.
they know
Right.
over and over and over. So sometimes it takes a moment, a crisis moment, in order to like jar us into like, okay, this is not working. We got to do something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah. So if shame is I don't want to say good, but it can be a short-term motivator, but can lead to, exhaustion.
Yep.
Um, it might also be said that if grace is the only source of motivation, which we, obviously from a biblical perspective we would agree with that, but what's the relationship like between grace and accountability in talking about transformation
Yep.
and growth,
Yep.
right? As a proper source of motivation.
So a minute back to guilt. Guilt is about like changing behaviors out of a good intention, out of a good space of like trying to grow and change and develop. There's accountability in that. It's not a shaming place, it's an authentic place of acknowledging that I need to work on some stuff and like in a safe environment that allows me to do that personally or relationally, etc. So the grace piece is allowing for a space to say, I'm not perfect and you're not perfect, but we're trying to get together. We're trying to relate. We're trying to heal and move forward in ways that are meaningful. And when we fall or when we have that step back or when there needs to be accountability or boundaries, then that needs to be in place. It needs to be followed through on. It needs to be taken seriously. And again, there's accountability and consequences that come with our actions, even from a guilt place. Um, but it's the way that that's done. It's the not dehumanizing picture we talked about earlier, but it's a caring and it's a relational space. And again, it might be like, this isn't working. We may have to do something different here, but I'm not going to throw you under the bus and I'm not going to dehumanize you in that. I'm not going to prop myself up in that. We're going to be real and authentic and have hard conversations and deal with growth and change. And we're going to sort this out with consequences and accountability in order to get us to a different end game than the shame gets us to. There are several elements in this relational process that often show up, like things like control, right? People from a shame place, they like to control. From a shame place, we do denial because we don't want to deal with the real feelings, the real circumstances. We dehumanize other people. We blame them. We're disrespectful to one another in the way we treat them. We act in all kinds of ways. We get angry. We get hurt. And we do things that are out of a defense that come right in the face of all the relational things that we're talking about from grace, with transformation, with a process. And often with a relationship with Christ comes a process of, how do I turn those things, control and blame and denial and disrespect and dehumanization, and how do we learn to start practicing being in relationship with someone, even when we're different? But how do we say that? How do we live that out in a Christ-centered way that is caring and loving, and yet may have consequences or boundaries or an outcome that needs to happen? That's what we can't. You can't do it on your own.
Right.
I can't do it on my own. I mean, I'm not that good a human being. I'm not. And so then we get into the fruit of the Spirit. Then we get into learning the characteristics of how to be a Christ follower. I mean, the only way we do this is by the help of the Holy Spirit. And when that's in place, then we have an opportunity to really be a different person, the person Christ intended for us to be.
Yeah. That's good. A couple of questions here to end, but it feels like we're kind of getting back to full circle of, if we want to replace the idea of shame with grace, what's that summing up of the idea of grace that we ought to take with us?
My personal definition of shame is never enough. It's a ladder with rungs that keep going and going and going that never gets you where you want to get to. And so as I wrestled with that, I said, well, what's my definition of grace? And it's really simple. Enough. Grace is, I'm enough. I don't have to be on the treadmill. I don't have to be the rat in the cage running that thing. I don't have to be on that ladder that just keeps going and going and going. If I can get to a space, if I can make some sense of, in Christ, I'm enough. And just, wow, what would that mean then? If I start from, I'm not proving anything, I'm not defending anything, I'm not coping and covering in all these different ways, but that God says I'm enough and I can function out of enoughness. It just is night and day. It's just a different place. I don't have to prove stuff to you. I don't have to perform. I don't have to hide, cover, isolate. I can say, you know what? I brought everything I know how to the table to the very best of my ability. And it was enough. And then it's in God's hands, what he chooses to do with that. And I'm going to leave it there and move on. Like I will today. When we're done, I'm like, I brought everything I knew how to our time and hope it lands in a way that it helps someone. And then, but like, have you ever had this experience where you do a podcast or you teach or preach or do something and somebody later comes up to you and they attribute something you said in a positive way and you never said it? Oh, it's the best, right? Well, it's the Holy Spirit, right? Working through that process. And they're like, when you said ... changed my life. And you're like, I never said that. That's fantastic, right? It happens all the time. And that's part of what I think happens in this context.
Yeah, that's great. That's such a good word. Thank you for your time. One last question. If for those listening, they want to go deeper, resources that you'd recommend, where would you point people? What are resources you'd recommend to them?
So Again, I mean, literally, there are a number of people who have written and researched and talk and teach and preach on stuff related to shame and grace. Kurt Thompson is an excellent resource. Um, Brene Brown, although not particularly from a faith place, is an excellent resource. My materials on Shame No More are solid. Jeff Van Vonderen has written a number of things on shame and grace. Um, Lou Smeeds has got lots of materials out there on shame and grace, and so there's just a number of places and people that again do a search on shame and grace and see what comes up on that other end. But there's a number of authors, a number of books, a number of materials out there that are really helpful to lean into as starter places of just like, what is this thing? And how do we make some sense of it? How do we move forward with it?
Yeah, great.
Well, Dr. Shaw, thank you. It's been great to have you here on campus and on the podcast today. Thanks for taking time to be with us.
Happy